I wanted my advice to be, if you're not sure that something's working, count to 10 before you say something. Because the amount of times, especially as a coach developer sitting on the sideline, wanting to go and ask a question, if I had just waited 10 seconds, the answer will either unfold for itself or it will be resolved in front of my eyes, especially when people are struggling with something. So if you're not sure if an activity is too difficult, if they're not experiencing success, just waiting that beat longer to see whether or not they can do it themselves makes a world of difference. Because if I was like 2 seconds away from solving the problem and you intervened, as an athlete, I would lose it. Like any coach that ever coached me, if they interjected just as I was about to solve something, I would not want to be there for the next month. It's like, if you had just let me do it, I would have actually worked it out for myself. I don't need your words all of the time.
Welcome to the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. My name's Tom Hartley. I'm a coach and a coach developer, and this is our next episode in our new series. Today, I'm joined by the fantastic Dr. Alex Lascu. I first met Alex online during COVID, talked about skill acquisition, and just connected with her on so many different levels. Alex works in coaching, skill acquisition, research, and learning design. She's a seriously sharp cookie and has worked across community and performance sport with so much work and passion in cricket. Her work helps connect research and real-world coaching practice. So, big idea in this episode: coaches are like gardeners. So coaches don't control learning directly, but we do create the conditions and environments where learning can grow. We talk about environment and practice design, starting with games, laughter, challenge, and learning being connected. Alex also shares some brilliant insight around why coaches should wait 10 seconds before stepping in, and also highlights this giggle meter, the idea of measuring some of the impacts of the work that you do as a coach with the sound of the session. Does it sound like fun? Are the kids enjoying themselves? Because we know that deliberate play can have a huge impact on deliberate practice. Because if the kids aren't having fun, they won't come back next week. So you might as well forget long-term development if the short-term development isn't good enough. So this one is about thoughtful, practical coaching advice. It's full of ideas that coaches can pick up. Let's get into my conversation with Dr. Alex Lascu.
No cricket.
No. Well, we can talk about cricket. Right, Alex, let's kick off with a bit of a curveball question. So I was looking at some of your presentations on YouTube, being a fanboy and everything, and found a quote, and I'm going to read you the quote, and I'd love to kind of just get your response to that. Mm-hmm. So, the gardener cannot actually grow tomatoes, squash, or beans. She can only foster an environment in which the plants do so.
Stanley McChrystal. That's going to be like, yeah, it'll be printed on our wall at work at this point. I think I've quoted it way too many times. Easily one of the best ways that we can describe what the difference is between the skill acquisition side of what I do and the learning design side. So yeah, we often use that quote to highlight that as much as you wish you could say something and get someone to move in a different way or to solve the problem immediately, the world doesn't really work like that. We foster learning environments for essentially gardeners. And that's one of the easiest ways to illustrate that to the average person who's maybe never considered themselves in that way as a coach.
So why are you using the analogy of a gardener for a coach?
I mean, we often talk about planting seeds as ideas. And if you take that one step further, every action we take, especially in a sporting world, is quite dynamic. We're always interacting with our environments. So what if we focus more on the environment that we're creating for people to learn in rather than what they are specifically doing within those environments? I'm a big believer that the behaviors that we use, the way that we move, is never really just because I decided to do so. It's because I'm responding to something. And especially in the team sports that I work with, I'm responding to other people who don't want me to do what I want. So being able to pick up on that in my environment is super important. That means when I'm coaching or when I'm developing other coaches, we need those really important pieces of the environment at training because they're going to be there in the game and you're not going to know to use them when they are in front of you if you haven't actually practiced picking up on them and learning what they can do for you.
So for somebody who might not have thought about the environment as a constraint or being aware of the constraints which are available within the environment, where would you start? What are the types of things that you would encourage coaches to think about playing with that might then affect the design of the task that they have at hand?
Yeah, space is probably the first one. It's the one that we're often restricted by. We don't always get the full available environment that we want, especially in the community sports that I've worked with, but also considering how taking away space or opening up space changes the way people move. So cricket being my first love, we are renowned for going immediately into the nets. We play a game on an open field and we practice in these claustrophobic, enclosed environments and then wonder why nobody can hit it off the square. Well, I'm very used to training in a space where when I hit the ball, it only goes a meter before it stops. So I don't actually know if the way that I play that shot is going to work on game day because I don't get the information to say that was good or that went far or it went to a fielder because for the constraint of not having to chase the ball every single time it's bowled, we decide to keep that space really small so we can get more repetitions. But by doing those repetitions, we don't learn what happens after we hit the ball. If we were to play in just the penalty box in football, that's usually done intentionally. We want it to feel more chaotic and clustered. We want there to be a bit of pressure and to feel like there's not enough space to move. But then we also will be upset when people don't play wide in a game because they don't know what that space is for. Why would I send the ball all the way to the sideline when we can move just as perfectly within the same constraints of that penalty box, but the entire length of a field? So there's always a bit of almost like a hangover effect. The way that we train and the way that we play the games and the spaces that we use, we will remember those even when those spaces change. And so we need to be a bit more intentional about how we use space so that we encourage people to explore the full length of a pitch, the full width of a pitch, or maybe even just lose a couple cricket balls in the creek.
Nice. Now, look, the environment obviously is just one part of what contributes towards designing effective practice or representative practice. And I know that you've spoken lots about, lots of your research centers around nonlinear pedagogy, ecological dynamics, et cetera, and again, in the talk I was watching, you have this triad between the person, the task, and the environment. Would you, for people who haven't necessarily been exposed to this, or even coaches who have, but perhaps want to deepen their understanding and their knowledge, could you give us a bit of a whistle-stop tour around those two now elements?
Yeah, so I think the triangle that you're referring to actually dedicated a tattoo to it hilariously. But
that is a sign of dedication to your work, isn't it? Absolutely.
Don't tell Carl Newell that. It's also a Star Wars reference. The idea is that we do have different types of constraints and they're going to act in different ways and at different times. So the person, the environment, and the task are constantly interacting. But our point isn't to say that this particular constraint is a task constraint because it's really hard to actually separate them. The point is to know that they exist and they may do different things at different times. The easiest example for me to use as someone who's 5'3" and only 165 centimeters tall, the odds of me dunking a basketball are infinitely low. They're not impossible, but they are low. And so if I were to play in a game where the constraint is that everybody has to dunk to win this particular activity, I'm screwed. I'm going to need a step ladder or someone's going to have to pick me up. But that doesn't mean I can't play basketball. It just means that particular moment, my own capabilities as a person means that it makes it very difficult for me to achieve that task. So I can change what the task is. I can say that you have to approach the hoop to score, but you can maybe do it in a variety of ways. And I can actually change so that every person potentially has their own way of solving that problem and leaving the task open enough for them to do so. So our personal constraints, our individual constraints are often the things that we are capable of, the way we think, the way we feel, the way we move, and the broader way we're raised, what we value, our characteristics and character. Whereas our task constraints are more the things that we can add or take away into the training environment themselves. It's usually the lever that the coach pulls the most. It's not just where we put the cones or the goals, it's also the instructions that we give, the way we reward behaviors within our training sessions, what we deem as success so that people are working towards that task. And of course, all of this is situated within a physical environment, but also a socio-cultural one as well. If I show up to my baseball games in the same way I show up to my cricket games, oh my goodness, did I learn very quickly that you're supposed to wear your white pants to baseball when you show up. I'm like, if I showed up to cricket in my whites, I would be ridiculed. So I'm sorry, I'll make the change.
There's so much that sits around this, and I think there's a really important point in there that these three elements don't exist explicitly separately from each other. They're connected, and it's quite holistic the way that you look at this rather than being reductionist.
I couldn't possibly tell you which category some constraints sit in. There's some arguments about what counts. Does instruction and feedback count as a task constraint? Is it an environmental constraint? It could be individual depending on how that person receives feedback. But the point is that it is shaping behavior in some way, shape, or form. And our job as the educator or the practitioner in these spaces is to know what happens potentially when we use those constraints, when we add or take them away to someone's experiences so that we can use them intentionally and hopefully to support people rather than to make their lives difficult.
As you and I would both know, Alex, coaches love to pick stuff up off others and try it out for themselves. Coaches are magpies or can be a thief sometimes, which is absolutely fine. It's how we all learn and develop stuff. So a new section to our podcast, Steal This Idea. And I wondered, is there another thing that a coach could steal from you this week that you can offer them with complete permission?
I am going to give people the giggle meter. So for anybody who's working, I would say in community sport, but honestly, I've used it so many times in the Olympic and Paralympic settings that I find myself in now. Have you actually stopped to listen to how much laughter occurs in your training sessions? Because laughter is this amazing metric of challenge and learning. And I noticed it predominantly when I was working with like 5 to 6 year olds, and they would have different types of laughs. For any parents out there, you can tell when something's about to happen by the like maniacal laugh that you can hear from a child. You can just tell that you're going to need to wipe some tears in a second because something is about to break. But you can also tell these like awkward bubbles of laughter when someone's trying something for the first time and they're not quite sure it's going to work, or the triumphant laugh when you actually get it and you surprise yourself at what you're capable of. And I think sound goes so unnoticed in our training environments because we're either predominantly the ones making it as the coach, we're worried about it getting too out of hand, so we're trying to shush everybody down so we can focus. But those kinds of sounds are really constructive. And they keep people coming back. I want to go to a training session where I can have a bit of a laugh and enjoy being there, but also be challenged at the same time. And so the giggle meter is this idea of how much laughter is happening and what type. What are you hearing after you give the instructions for an activity? And step back and listen, not just watch. Actually listen to see what is happening in front of you. And if you can hear the differences between how those activities are landing, how challenging they are, then you'll find it easier to adapt those activities because you'll notice it's not working before they tell you or before the error rate gets too high.
And I think there's something really meaningful in there for coaches to reflect on, because we often will talk about, what does your session look like? What does your session feel like? But what does it sound like is really important. And I appreciate the point that you made that we might feel quite a lot of that time, or we might feel a lot of the sound by talking ourselves. So to step back and listen is really important. And I remember when I was working in community sport years ago, being on the side and turning away from the practice, and you could just hear the children laughing and enjoying themselves. And it sounded like something that they were really into. And what a great metric. What a great thing to pay attention to as a coach. I know at the moment you're working more of Olympic, Paralympic athletes at a kind of high performance end of the sport. How does that play out? Do you still notice this within practice? And is it just as important there as it is at the beginning?
Absolutely, yes. And because these people have dedicated so much time and their livelihood and effort to this pursuit of a goal that is so nebulous and difficult to nail down, the ability to enjoy being in a training environment is absolutely crucial. And we'll see it in that sense of challenge more so than anything else. So we'll use a bit of I bet you can't do that, just to see how people respond. And the idea that you can overcome a comment like that and then turn around and be like, haha, I did it. See, did you see that? I did the thing. We don't really get moments like those outside of like playing in the backyard as kids with siblings. So I will actually keep in mind of the last time that I heard laughter at a training session that I'm working with a sport. And it's either my own or the athletes themselves. I know I'm doing my best work when I'm giggling and laughing and making jokes and making light of a situation. But I also know when that's not necessary. And I've had a few coaches come up to me already and be like, oh, you're not doing work right now. Like, this isn't training. And I would love for the day when they realize, oh no, that was actually the best training session, because everyone was so tuned into what was happening that we were enjoying ourselves. And both things can happen at the same time. We can laugh and learn something really complex at the same time.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think an important point to make on one of the episodes we had in the last series with Joe Baker, who kind of his research specializes in talent ID and talent development, highlighted the fact in high-end sport, some stuff is really difficult and uncomfortable, but elite athletes find a way of taking an enjoyment or appreciation from the struggle and from the difficult nature of it. I'm not a high-end athlete, Alex, but I went to a HIIT session at 6 o'clock this morning, and in some kind of self-hatred type of way, I really enjoyed myself. So I suppose it's finding energy, finding happiness, if you like, within stuff that maybe others wouldn't sometimes is really important at the sharper end of sport.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a white belt, one stripe in jiu-jitsu right now. And the amount of times I have to explain it where, oh, no, it's okay. The bruises around my neck are just because we were practicing chokeholds this week. I'm fine. I promise. Like, why would you do that? Like, I could go anywhere at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning and I'm choosing to go to a jiu-jitsu gym and fight grown men. Why? Because there is some element of it when you sneak out of a chokehold like that. I will actually commentate because I'm so used to not being able to, illustrate what's happening in a training session that I love that I can do that. Mouth guard in and be like, actually, you didn't close the triangle enough, so yeah, let me out. Thanks for that, buddy. And then comes the next attack. I will learn to stop talking eventually while fighting, but I do love the interactions that we have when they sit there like, why are you speaking? I just worked it out. You did it. Do say that you end up fighting like your personality. So I've been called mildly annoying multiple times.
Fair enough. Is that the first time in a long time you've been a novice at something?
No. So I remember reading Joe Baker's papers as a kid. I was in high school, actually, when I started being interested in talent identification and development. And sampling sport was something that I became obsessed with. So I'm actually up to 39 sports that I've played in the pursuit of perpetually being a novice. Yep. So last year I picked up jiu-jitsu, flag football, and gridiron, and a much smaller sport called fistball. So the goal is to get to 50 sports as soon as I can. I want to get to 42 by the end of this year, which would be pretty cool. But yeah, the second I spent way too much time in cricket, I realized that I was becoming very unidimensional as an athlete, and that's the last thing I wanted. So I'd already conquered all of the skill sets you can think of in cricket. I was a pace bowler and a wicket keeper and can bowl ambidextrous. So I was like, okay, what next? And I've just been doing that ever since.
A few years ago, I went with some coaches to the British Cycling Centre up in Manchester, and they've got an incredible indoor BMX track, and went and stood at the top of the ramp where the BMXs come down. And from the side, it looks challenging, but from the top, it's flipping terrifying. And I was chatting to another coach who works in a sport where there's quite a lot of risk, and we were talking about how standing up here in an alien environment made us both feel a little bit uneasy, and how we're asking the people that we're coaching to do stuff that might feel like a risk, either a risk physically, I'm going to hurt myself if I come off this badly, or a risk socially, like if I make a mistake while I'm doing this, how am I going to feel? And obviously some people's relationships with making mistakes is complicated, and there's a big role in there for coaches to help reframe mistakes as learning opportunities. How can coaches put themselves in positions where they're a novice at something, and what's it taught you as well from doing this?
Yeah, I would sometimes constrain myself as a coach just to make sure that I was really paying attention to what I was doing. Sometimes I'd show up to a cricket training session with one ball and that was it. Other times I would then give the ball to the athletes and be like, okay, guys, I haven't prepped a warm up today, but I'm feeling like we've all had really big days. So what kind of game do you want to play with the warm up? I've only got one ball, and just see what happens, see what unfolds. I think it's so easy to ask something of someone else and then not want to do it ourselves, that I would constantly push myself to be the most uncomfortable person in that space after I'd built a relationship where they knew where I was doing. So I would be quite explicit, be like, I'm not sure if this is going to land. And please tell me ASAP if it doesn't, because I don't want to do an activity that you're not enjoying, but I need to try it to see how it goes.
Yeah.
And that authenticity has always done me well with the players themselves. It has always worked with the team. It hasn't worked with authority. And that's always the fine line. I think it's so easy to say, okay, well, I can do something different. I can sit down in a training session and see what I notice when I sit on the ground. But I've also had really horrible feedback from people who would observe the session and be like, what are you doing? And not mean it as a curious, genuine question, to be like, why don't you look like every other coach who's out here doing the right thing? And so although I really enjoy those really difficult, uncomfortable spaces, they're difficult and uncomfortable not for the reasons that you think sometimes, and maybe they're completely external factors too, but I always found it worthwhile because at the very least, if they genuinely asked, I could always give them a reason why. And I was the first person to admit that it was not working. Let's change it. But I need you to tell me that. And you being the team and the players, not the person on the sideline watching.
Yeah, no, completely. And maybe it's not all the time, every time that you're experimenting and trying these things. It's trying to find the right time to try something new and different. I've been there, sat on the floor, watching a session, and people looking at me with those square sideways looks. So, well, what are you doing? And I remember a happy accident once. A number of us were going to take a training session with a group in Oxford, and nobody bought any footballs. We all looked at each other when we arrived. I thought you were bringing the footballs today. No, you were. And from that emerged one of my favourite coaching games, no ball football, which is effectively directional tag. But if we hadn't have had that day, we wouldn't have discovered that unique little game that we developed there and then in the moment with the players. And it just comes from not being perfect, I suppose.
Yeah, I've definitely played ghost cricket, waiting for someone else who had the bag of balls to arrive so that we could play. And it's amazing. Like, if you say it with enough enthusiasm and conviction, people will genuinely believe that you had planned that activity and it was intentional. The amount of, ghost cricket shots I've played, you know what? It's the perfect time to learn a ramp shot because there's no consequence of the ball hitting your face. And I bet you every basketball player wishes they could play ghost basketball because I can just say swish and you can't tell me it didn't go in.
Touche. I'd be very good at that, I think. Right, Alex, let's move into part 2 of the conversation, the game plan. Now, in every episode of the podcast, we're asking our guests to contribute something to our game plan. This is a shared playbook of stories and ideas and lessons that any coach can draw on. And every guest is adding something, I say unique to it. There'll be a point when it's not necessarily unique, but it's unique to that person. So what are you adding? What are you going to bring into our game plan?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think, can my game plan be start with a game?
Of course it can.
Because I think we just leave it to the end way too often. So I think my contribution to the game plan is play the game first, even if it is a game with specified rules or something that's specifically targeting something, but do not be afraid to start with play, because the thing that you might need to work on that week will fall out of the way that they're playing already, and you'll have a sense of what you're looking for as people are playing. You don't even need to be there sometimes. Just leaving the equipment behind and giving them a bit of space to work out how to play or what to play can be really useful. Or it can be a very structured game with modified rules to make sure that we are hitting the same objectives. Or, you know, if you've got a periodization of a season that you don't want to disrupt it too much. But The amount of times that I have walked into a session thinking that we needed to work on something specific and today was not the day to work on it because something else came up instead. I couldn't respond to that if I just rolled out the drills that I'd already planned for. I wanted to be able to respond to what was happening in those games. So yeah, don't be afraid to start with a game and see what falls out.
It's funny you say that because I often thought, why traditionally do we leave the game till the end? It happens in football all the time. And also why sometimes is the game used as a reward for the players after they do what the coach wants them to do. It's a bit draconian sometimes when you look at it like that. But from a genuine coaching perspective, by starting with a game and not just letting the game being the teacher, which could feel a bit woolly if that's extenuated far too long, but by starting with a game, what's the stuff that you would then maybe notice to then inform what you do next? How important is it for like a diagnostic understanding of where we need to go in the practice?
I think for me, we can get really reactive based on what happened over the weekend or what happened on game day. And then we want to hammer it immediately afterwards in the next training session because it's the biggest problem we have right now. But the game as a diagnostic tool at the start of a session lets me know whether or not the thing that happened on the weekend is a genuine problem or did it just emerge from the scenario that we found ourselves in? Like, what really is the problem? Even if we are successful in match play when it matters, where does that success come from? Is it from really good behaviors? Is it from consistency? Is it from the way that we play together? Is it the execution of instructions from the sideline that someone is calling play by play like they've got an Xbox controller in their hand? Or is it genuinely from the way that people interact with each other? So it helps me determine, is the thing that we're working on today because it's an ongoing, skill development opportunity that we want to have for future success and long-term development? Or am I just being reactive based on what happened on the weekend? And if the same thing pops up again, even when it's just casual play or unrestricted play, then that's a good sign for me, like, okay, maybe we need to spend a bit more time with this problem. And if it doesn't, I throw the session plan out the window and go, hey guys, I noticed this is happening. Do you feel like this often? Like, do we think that this is happening a lot in the way that we play? And it just, we haven't seen it lately. To get that real sense check of what it means to feel like being out in that field, whatever sport you're playing. It kind of just tunes me into what the real problem is instead of just the problem that I can see. So
tuning in, paraphrasing here, looking for patterns, perhaps in what starts to emerge. And I love the language that you used. I've noticed this. What do you think? I think being able to not make your intervention in a way that you're being autocratic, but to highlight an observation and then use that as a stimulus for a conversation with the group or a starting point for where you go next feels really co-engineered, co-created, something that you do together with the group. And like, there's that old adage, isn't there? Coaching is something you do with people, not to people. But that simple language really brings that to life.
Yeah. And I recently heard someone who had just come back to coaching. They were working with 13-year-old girls, which is a notorious age group. And they said they had to negotiate with them. It's like, I don't think it's negotiating. I think it's designing it together. Like, if the thing that you've asked them to do is not something that they want, should they have been doing it in the first place? Now, there are some elements of, okay, we're going to practice things that make us uncomfortable and we can't do yet. So people will do a very good impression of trying to get out of that. But for the most part, if they understand why things are happening in just about any sporting context, people are willing to give it a try. So if you find yourself negotiating, maybe that drill needed to be changed anyway, and it's actually a better fit when we make it together. I'm not a 13-year-old girl. I can't tell you what it feels like to be out there anymore.
Yeah. We all play different roles and being able to balance that. I've done some work with Play Their Way, this child first coaching movement in the UK. So we're thinking about how do we enable children to have more voice and choice in the practice and then think about their long-term journey. And I often see coaches faced with this real dilemma around what does giving players choice and a voice really mean? I don't want to hand everything over because children aren't experts in their own development in their own right. It's so important to have a voice and offer some choice, but maybe it's informed choice and create choice architecture rather than potentially drowning in the freedom of I don't really know what to do, so I'm just going to say something. That genuine co-creation, co-design piece with athletes, where do you begin? How do you go about it?
I always start with challenge, because challenge is so personal that there's no way that I could manufacture something that makes you feel under pressure or challenged by something until I actually understand what makes you feel like you're in those situations. And so asking someone, how would I make this easier for you? Or how can we make this harder? They will often come up with things that I never would have considered as a point of challenge. And so giving that sort of open space for people to consider what they need from the environment is an awesome place to start. Even just saying, I want to change something, but I'm not quite sure what. Are there any rules you don't like about this activity? If you could, I don't even care if it's like a rule of the game that is supposed to happen in competition. If you could abolish one rule, what would it be? And like kids especially will be like, okay, there's no offside in football anymore. I'm like, okay, we can play that. But see how annoying it is when someone's standing at the back corner waiting. Maybe there's a reason we have that rule. And so just making it so that it is confined to a space, but a space that's like meaningful and emotional, can make it really easy to get into the habit of designing things together, especially when it responds to their needs too. So the need to feel like they're accomplished, to demonstrate competence, to seek challenge, but also be able to overcome it sometimes, because it's terrifying when you can't. I can't manufacture those from the outside looking in. So those are usually the first places that I start to then co-design.
Yeah. I suppose that there couldn't be many worse things in a coaching environment where you have a load of children who have shared their ideas, who then you say, no, we're not doing that. Like, responding to their needs is so important, but doing it in a meaningful way. I had a conversation years ago, a coach who I've always looked up to, a person called Peter Sturgis, who's led on football at the youth level in the UK for such a long time, and asked this question, like, how do I navigate asking children what they want and think, but then not disappointing everybody, but also dealing with the chaos of 15 different ideas flying at me? And he said, well, if you've identified where you're trying to get to this week or this season or whatever it might be, that then is a really nice filter to be able to draw back their ideas to. So if they're suggesting things which might feel a left field, or almost challenging them to say, well, how much this week is that going to help us achieve our goal? And then you can help them rationalize, maybe this is the best thing, or an edited version of the suggestion, rather than, no, that won't work, or yes, we'll do that, and we could go off in any direction.
I've also used like a Shark Tank kind of approach to it. So if we have a spare opportunity for a game within the training session themselves, I'll let teams come up with a game that they want to play. They have to pitch it to everybody. And so whoever gets the most votes at the end for the game to play wins, and that takes it completely out of my hands. And it's usually when we've already achieved the things that we need to within a training session. But just this idea of how would I convince my peers to play my game was really fascinating to witness. And I've done it in coach development and education courses too. I actually did it at the Global Skill Acquisition Conference. I made all of the coaches pitch to the players, okay, my drill is this. And they're like, okay, maybe not that one. And they were also other coaches pretending to be athletes. It's not like they were actual athletes. So there was a bit of bias there. But just watching people, trying to articulate why you would want to do this activity is not really something we have to justify too often at that level. So yeah, feel free to use the Shark Tank.
I am 100% stealing, taking that with me. Yeah, thank you. What a great idea. Do you know, I came across something the other day called PowerPoint karaoke. Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah. Where someone like makes the slide deck for you and you have to, I've seen it. I've not done it, but I kind of want to.
Oh, I'm going to try it out with some coaches soon. They won't know what's hit them, but I just, can't wait to see what chaos unfolds. Okay, part 3 of our conversation, Alex, are game-changing advice. And we know that coaches listening to this podcast love some tangible insight or tangible advice that they might go and apply in their own environment. Based on the context, they might need to edit it slightly, or it might be an idea that perhaps they're not quite so sure about at the moment, but they'll reflect on and maybe come to at a later time. So what would you like to share? What's your advice for coaches listening to this?
I wanted my advice to be if you're not sure that something's working, count to 10 before you say something. Because the amount of times, especially as a coach developer sitting on the sideline, wanting to go and ask a question, if I had just waited 10 seconds, the answer will either unfold for itself or it will be resolved in front of my eyes, especially when people are struggling with something. So if you're not sure if an activity is too difficult, if they're not experiencing success, just waiting that beat longer to see whether or not they can do it themselves makes a world of difference. Because if I was like 2 seconds away from solving the problem and you intervened, as an athlete, I would lose it. Like any coach that ever coached me, if they interjected just as I was about to solve something, I would not want to be there for the next month. It's like, if you had just let me do it, I would have actually worked it out for myself. I don't need your words all of the time. So if you feel like you're on the edge of wanting to add something to stop something, wait an extra 10 seconds and see if the thing you're about to say actually solves itself. And if it doesn't, then they're going to need it anyway. And they won't even notice that you waited 10 seconds. You're the only one who knows that.
Don't save the kids from learning stuff. So I had this
Don't get in the way.
Yeah, totally. I had this dilemma when I was coaching recently that the group I was taking was struggling in a game situation and they couldn't quite find the answers to figure out how to get the better of the opposition, especially when we didn't have the ball. And I remember having this monologue in my head of how long do I leave them? When's the appropriate point to step in and help them? Because leaving them for too long could be damaging. But equally, I think they've got this in them. I know they can find the answers if they're given the conditions to get there themselves, and also the trust it models for me in them to go and solve the problem for themselves. So I hear you. And I think it's this professional judgment and decision-making process a coach goes through to work out how long is enough to hold the space and time. But I would encourage anyone listening to this to think, well, just stretch it a little, just hold on a little bit longer and see what happens. And what's the harm? 5 seconds longer, 10 seconds longer, and it's not going to do any harm. You might be on the edge of something really special.
Yeah. And if you're really unsure if now is the right time, try and find a way that they can ask for help subtly. So I've often had that conversation of, I want to be able to know when to provide extra support, but I don't want to interject. How can we do that? And most of the time I'll come up with like hint cards or, code word, or even just a hand up, especially in surf lifesaving. Like, it's very common to just raise your fist in the air. And so I love this idea of, okay, if you think that this is not solvable with the skill set you have right now, I want you to put your hand up in a fist like you're drowning, because then I know now is the time to come in and actually jump in the water with you. Otherwise, I'm happy to stay on the shore as long as you're happy to be out in the water.
Great analogy, by the way, because I think that works really nicely. And just the physical motion of doing that sends a really clear signal. And something I'm reflecting on from our conversation is that we've spoken about, well, why do we leave the game till the end? Why do we make real assumptions around when to step in or not? Why do we presume that the children or the players that we're working with want this? Perhaps as coaches, we don't ask enough questions of the people that we're working with. And there'll be lots of reasons for that. Imagine if we did a little bit more of that co-creation and the co-design and what it could lead to.
Especially if it's something that you start with. If the part of the relationship building with a team or an athlete for the first time is absolutely built on that foundation of asking questions, it's integral in my work as a sports scientist. Like, the amount of times I've started a conversation with, I'm going to ask a lot of questions. And it's not necessarily because I don't know what I'm doing. It's because I really want to know why you're doing what you're doing. And I will never make an assumption on that. So if you get sick of my questions, if I'm absolutely pestering the daylights out of you, just come and tell me. The next time you roll out a drill and be like, okay, so I'm doing it for this reason. I'm like, awesome, thank you. Just let me write that down so that I don't have to come up to you every time and be like, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Because that's going to annoy you as much as it's going to annoy me.
Right, Alex, we're going to test and pilot a final part to the conversation. I think you like Ted Lasso as much as I like Ted Lasso. Am I right?
It actually became my nickname in cricket because no one could pronounce my last name. It's like Ted's close enough.
Your last name is very close, so that's good. There's a link in there. So for anybody who's watched Ted Lasso on TV, they'll remember the infamous "Believe" sign on the dressing room wall on yellow paper. Believe in believe. And I would like to ask you, Alex, to give us a line, okay? Something that somebody listening to this would want to pin to their coaching room wall, which is a bit of a aid memoir for this conversation. So what's the line you want people to write down with a Sharpie and stick to their wall?
I was thinking something along the lines of laughter is learning. Like just something to bring back to the idea of sound, especially the complexity of learning and the different ways that it can show up in our spaces. And you'll often find that, games and the actual game itself that we're playing instead of just the drills that we're doing will probably elicit the most laughter. So maybe it's a good reminder to start with the game too. But yeah, I was thinking about this as we've been talking, and I think laughter is learning is probably a good summary of the conversation that we've had.
Brilliant. Alex, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast. It's a pleasure and a great excuse to speak to you. And you've got your own podcast. Tell us about it.
Yes, I host The Deep End. So the idea is that every coach that I would speak to would say, I'm nothing special, and say the most profound thing following that but. And so I started to introduce them to, be a podcast guest where they could tell stories like that. So The Deep End is about everyday people who do extraordinary things, especially in sport. And it's open to anyone who has a coaching or sporting story to tell. And if you tell me that you're boring, I will then recruit you immediately because chances are you're not.
Wonderful. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. Alex, thanks for being a brilliant guest. Lovely to see you.
Thank you so much for having me, and likewise.
Thanks for listening to the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please follow the show and share it with a coach who might find it useful. I'd love to hear your feedback and any ideas you have for future guests. You can get in touch through the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and go well in your next coaching session.